Antipodes soon learned that the reason why distant ships sometimes looked as though they were disappearing over the edge of the world was that they were disappearing over the edge of the world. But there was still a limit even to Golder's vision in the mist-swirled, dust-filled air. He looked up. Looming high over the university was the grim and ancient Tower of Art, said to be the oldest building on the disk, with its famous spiral staircase of 8,888 steps. From its crenellated roof, the haunt of ravens and disconcertingly alert gargoyles, a wizard might see to the very edge of the disk. After spending 10 minutes or so coughing horribly, of course. "Sod that," he muttered. "What's the good of being a wizard after all? Aviento Thessalus. I would fly. To me, spirits of air and darkness." He spread a gnarled hand and pointed to a piece of crumbling parapet. Octarine fire sprouted from under his nicotine-stained nails and burst against the rotting stone far above. It fell. By a finely calculated exchange of velocities, Golder rose, nightshirt flapping around his bony legs. Higher and higher he soared, hurtling through the pale light, like an elderly but powerful wizard being propelled upwards by an expertly judged thumb on the scales of the universe. He landed in a litter of old nests, caught his balance, and stared down at the vertiginous view of a disk dawn. At this time of the long year, the Circle C was almost on the sunset side of Cori Celesti, and as the daylight sloshed down into the lands around Ankh-Morpork, the shadow of the mountains scythed across the landscape like the gnomon of God's sundial. But, nightwards, racing the slow light towards the edge of the world, a line of white mist surged on. There was a crackling of dry twigs behind him. He turned to see Umpe Truman, second in command of the order, who had been the only other wizard able to keep up. Golder ignored him for a moment, taking care only to keep a firm grip of the stonework and strengthen his personal spells of protection. Promotion was slow in a profession that traditionally bestowed long life, and it was accepted that younger wizards would frequently seek advancement via dead men's curly shoes, having previously emptied them of their occupants. Besides, there was something disquieting about young Truman. He didn't smoke, only drank boiled water, and Golder had the nasty suspicion that he was clever. He didn't smile often enough, and he liked figures and the sort of organization charts that show lots of squares with arrows pointing to other squares. In short, he was the sort of man who could use the word personnel and mean it. The whole of the visible disk was now covered with a shimmering white skin that fitted it perfectly. Golder looked down at his own hands and saw them covered with a pale network of shining threads that followed every movement. He recognized this kind of spell. He'd used them himself, but his had been smaller, much smaller. "It's a change spell," said Truman. "The whole world is being changed." Some people thought Golder grimly would have had the decency to put an exclamation mark on the end of a statement like that. There was the faintest of pure sounds, high and sharp, like the breaking of a mouse's heart. "What was that?" he said. Truman cocked his head. C-sharp, I think," he said. Golder said nothing. The white shimmer had vanished, and the first sounds of the waking city began to filter up to the two wizards. Everything seemed exactly the same as it had before. All that, just to make things stay the same? He patted his nightshirt pockets distractedly and finally found what he was looking for, lodged behind his ear. He put the soggy dog end in his mouth, called up mystical fire from between his fingers, and dragged hard on the wretched roll-up until little blue lights flashed in front of his eyes. He coughed once or twice. He was thinking very hard indeed. He was trying to remember if any gods owed him any favours. In fact, the gods were as puzzled by all this as the wizards were, but they were powerless to do anything, and in any case were engaged in an eons-old battle with ice giants, who had refused to return the lawn-mower. But some clue as to what actually had happened might be found in the fact that Rincewind, whose past life had just got up to a quite interesting bit when he was 15, suddenly found himself not dying after all, but hanging upside down in a pine tree. He got down easily by dropping uncontrollably from branch to branch until he landed on his head in a pile of pine needles, where he lay gasping for breath and wishing he'd been a better person.